Folks, welcome to the Crush the Quo. Here at Crush the Quo, we are on a mission to fuel the change needed to create growth and elevate performance through transformed mindsets, habits, and actions or behavior. We feature industry experts, business leaders, sellers, enablement practitioners, entrepreneurs who come and they share their ideas, their experience, their knowledge, their thoughts and practical strategies for us as individuals, but also as organizations that will help drive growth, embrace change. In today's webinar, we are going to be talking about gaining access to the C-suite. And unfortunately, the reality is it's much harder than ever before. Before I hand over and before I introduce the fantastic and amazing Jacques, what I want to do is I want to start our session with a story. Our story starts in around 1990 with this gentleman by the name of Peter Rosengard, who is not your average insurance salesman. For a start, he has block booked a breakfast table at Claridge's, which is one of the top hotels in London, fetches around £7,000 a room per night. He has booked a breakfast table every work day, right up till 2046. He'll be 100 at that time because in his mindset, he has no plan to retire. His opinion is, what's the point of retiring when you can keep enjoying what you do? Here, he has regular meetings, he entertains his guests, his prospects, he knows all the hotel staff, the chefs, the waiting staff. And interestingly, he applied for his job at London Abbey Life as an insurance salesman purely out of necessity. All right, he needed the job, he needed the income. And on the way back from his interview with Abbey Life, he discovered that he was in fact very good with sales. And he sold his first life insurance policy to the cab driver that was driving him home from his interview. So the interesting thing about Peter Rosengard and his claim to fame is he closed one of the largest life insurance deals in the history of life insurance. And here's the fact. It all started with one cold call. After Peter read a newspaper article one morning about a deal with MCA Records in California, purchasing Geffen Records for $600 million US. He put two and two together and he concluded that David Geffen was indispensable to that deal. And without him, MCA Records would be exposed. So, using a system of cold calling from a London telephone booth, which you can see a picture of here, he called MCA Records. And he asked the operator to be put through to MCA in Hollywood, to which the operator responded, "How do you spell Hollywood?" I suppose that's a forgivable question in the 1990s. Maybe not. Now, the question is, which department did he call? Did he call HR? Did he call finance? Well, not in this case. He decided he was going to go right to the top and try to get hold of the president of MCA Records, Mr. Sid Sheinberg himself. So he reached Sid's assistant, he left a message, and he hung up. 20 phone calls later, the same day around the company, he learned that Sid was in fact in Florence, Italy, attending a film festival. 6 calls later to all the top hotels in Florence, he found out where Sid was staying. And he made a call. Now, you don't just make a call, right? You know as well as I do. You never just make the call. You have to plan it. You have to know what you're going to say, what you're going to ask, because you may only get one chance to make that first impression. And in this case, guaranteed, this would be the only chance Peter Rosengard would get to make that impression with Sid Sheinberg. So he, with some simple deductions, he determined that the best time to reach Sid Sheinberg in his hotel room would be 7 p.m. that night. And after he was put through by the hotel concierge, he got through to Sid's hotel room. The phone rang. Sid answered. "Sid Sheinberg here." And you'll have to wait till the end of our session today to find out what happened next. So with that, I am now going to hand over to Jacques. I have the great pleasure to introduce to you Jacques. Jacques has a tremendous career behind him, and he draws on his corporate experience representing the executive buyer's perspective. And he conducts many workshops and keynotes to sales teams, equipping them on how to successfully engage the C-suite and build long-term C-level relationships. So his corporate experience includes being executive vice president at Berkshire Hathaway, CFO at Charles Schwab Bank, director of international operations at Standards & Poor, and many, many others. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Jacques, who's now going to lead us through a conversation on gaining access to the C-suite and why it's much harder than ever before. Jacques, over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. But now I'm dying to know what happened with Peter.
Oh, you really, really want to know? Should I say now, or should we wait till the end?
Yeah, say now, because I can't concentrate on something else. I have it in my mind now.
Okay, well, he got through to Sid Sheinberg. Sid answered the phone and said, "Sid Sheinberg here," to which Peter Rosengard replied and said, "Mr. Sheinberg, congratulations on your very shrewd deal signing MCA records for $600 million. However, have you considered the risk to that deal if anything were to happen to David Geffen?" To which Sid Sheinberg replied and said, "Well, Mr. Rosengard," and I quote, "we're not a bunch of schmucks here. We were going to get to that, but you're the only one who's called, and you're the only one that's called now. Your timing is perfect. What did you have in mind?" To which Peter Rosengard replied, "How about $100 million life insurance policy for David Geffen?" To which Sid replied, "Sounds reasonable to me. Let's get it done." A few months later, after a lot of paperwork and underwriting, they closed one of the largest deals in life insurance history for $100 million, putting Peter Rosengard into the 1990 Guinness Book of Records. And there you have it.
That's a great story. I love it.
It's a good one.
It's a good one. And I don't think many people have chances to call all the hotels and be able to track their executive that they want to get. But you definitely need a little luck and a lot of perseverance.
Absolutely,
but most important, you need to have the message, the substance. A lot of people concentrate on, what to write in an email, what to send, which channel, is it an SMS, is it a call, is it an email? But really, the biggest part of reaching the CXO is the preparation piece. So I'm hoping this session is more relating to your questions and your interaction rather than my just talking to you about some of my experience in real life. FYI, I used to chair the capital committee. This is the committee that's made up of the C-suite that basically decides on which investments to make and which vendors to choose. And what I try to represent in these sessions is how we, on the C-suite, looked at different salespeople, vendors, what interested us, what didn't, which ones we wanted to meet, which ones we didn't, and what our mindset from the C-suite side. Okay, so with that, the most important thing, as I mentioned, I have 3 parts to this session. One is the research and preparation. The other one is knowing who to get to, because there are a lot of executives now that are involved. And then what to put in that message, both substance and form.
Hey, Jacques, just before you carry on there, can I just quickly go back to a slide if you don't mind? Is CXO access more or less difficult now than before the pandemic?
It's interesting because a lot of people thought during the pandemic it is actually easier to get to us because everybody's at home, in jail, and then you know where they are. You don't have to worry whether they're in this country or this plane or this office. You know they're going to be at home because of the pandemic. Well, the problem with that is that everybody thought that, and there were a lot more calls and a lot more emails into these executives than ever before. So it was actually harder to get to the CXOs during the pandemic than before or even after, ironically. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it wasn't easy during the pandemic. And the other thing is during the pandemic, it wasn't top of mind for them to get a call from a salesperson or a consultant. That just was not the perfect time for them, unless you basically call them for a way to be able to get around or address the pandemic with their staff, with their people, with their goals. That's the different side of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So what does it mean to really be prepared before you get to the CXO? And by the way, when I mean CXO, everybody knows I'm not talking about just the top CXOs. In other words, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the CIO. I'm talking about anybody in senior or executive management who is directly or indirectly responsible for the decision on your proposal. So these are all multi-million euro, dollar, pound proposals, and they involve a lot of players who get involved in the decision. So it doesn't have to be the top level. It could be N-1 and being the CEO, and sometimes N-2 in multi-billion-dollar corporations. So you need to know the industry, you need to know the company, and you need to know the person. And we'll talk about these real quickly. And I'm not going to talk about what you know. Most of you would know how to do research and preparation on these. I'm going to talk about what most salespeople, consultants do not do, because this is just based on our experience, what they did not do. So moving into the first one, industry research. You know how to look at the industry, the journals, the Gartners, look at the competitors, look at the website, all that stuff, know the KPIs. But most people do not pick up an industry research analyst report. Those are the investment houses like Solomon, like Payne, like First Boston. They put out the research analysis on the industry. And they talk about what's going on. What are some of the external factors? What are some of the economic, macroeconomic, microeconomic factors that affect that industry? What are we going to be guided by, controlled by, influenced by, but we need to manage too. We can't control, but we need to manage. And industry reports are very useful because these people, they spend all their time putting together an industry report. And those reports come out probably like once or twice a year. And I'm not suggesting you read all the industry reports, just read one from a major investment house, and it will give you a lot of information and insights that you would not get in an annual report or out of the web or other information. Let's go to the company. Again, on the company, most people go to the annual report, the release, the press releases, what products and solutions they have. But what they don't do is they don't look at some registration or regulatory requirements. If it were a US or a US-based company, it's say 10K. If it's a non-US or an EMEA or an Australia, they would have, but it's listed in the exchange, it would have a registration document. And if it happens to also be listed in the US, it would have a registration document in addition to that called 20F, which has some information that is mandatory and that is very insightful. And then on top of that, you have the research analysts that put not industry reports, but company reports. So they focus specifically on the company. And they'll talk about things such as management effectiveness. They talk about all of the KPIs where they're behind on versus their peers. They'll talk about things that we are very concerned about in terms of being judged and also effectively really, how not only the inside look at us, but the outside look at us. And then most people don't listen to the quarterly calls for some reason. These are for public companies, public being listed companies. If it's a listed company, every quarter after the results are out, there's 1 hour call with analysts and with top management, usually the CEO, CFO, and one other executive, where we talk about what happened in the quarter and a little bit a preview of what we're looking in the future. And if you take 1 hour of your time, because that's how long those meetings last, take 1 hour of your time and listen to that, it will give you a huge amount of information. It is priceless. If somebody said to me, this is a new account you have, and you have 1 hour to prepare for it before the meeting with the CEO, CFO, or COO, this is what I would listen to more than anything else. And most people do not do it again. Most of the stuff that I have in there, people do not do. Let's go to the CXO. The CXO, you can get the org chart of any company and you should see who was on it. And you probably do. And you look at their profile and you look at where they've been. All that is done usually. What's not done is looking at how these top executives are compensated. I don't mean the salary. I mean, what are the variables that they get the big bonuses on? When you hear about these multi-$100 million bonuses, quite often they relate to some of these KPIs that are non-fixed. They really are variable depending on some factors. And those are the ones that we're also very concerned about because they relate to our performance and our deep pockets. I'll show you an example. This is Vodafone. Everybody knows Vodafone is like a big telco Anglo-German company. This is the actual components of the top 3 executives. You'll see something highlighted in yellow here that talks about customer appreciation. Customer appreciation represents 1/4 of those executives' bonuses. What's showing is that instead of they're achieving 1/4, which is 50% because it's maxed to 200%, they achieved only 13.8%. So they're really, really low on the customer satisfaction side, which means if you come up with a solution or a proposal or a service that's going to improve customer sat, they're going to listen to you a lot more than if you have a proposal that doesn't, because they missed out on that. And to them, it's even identified what that is. It's churn, it's net promoter score, and that is worth millions for them. So if you identify an area where they're light on, where they're weak on, that they haven't achieved, that you can help them with, they get your attention.
Jacques, can I pause you on a question on that slide? What if the CXOs or the executives have achieved or even exceeded all of the KPIs? How do we respond to that?
That's wonderful. If they achieve all their KPIs, including their variables, first of all, they're in a good mood and they're happy and they're looking good. That's nice. But what is their objective, even if they achieve and exceed it? Their objective is to do what? To improve their performance every year. What have you done for me lately? So, so we still want to improve these. It doesn't mean that if I got there, I want to stay there. Think of a salesperson, and they've achieved 120% of their target. And you basically propose a way for them to achieve 140, 150%. They're going to listen to you. Yeah, I want to do better. Not only that, but when I achieve my targets, as most salespeople would know, that becomes a little bit of a base for the following period, the following year. So my target is going to increase even more. So you always want to target what they're still being judged on, whether they achieved it or not.
Okay, thank you.
And all that information is public information. And if you know about that information before you even try to access, you're going to differentiate yourself from most salespeople, period.
Thank you.
Okay, so now you've done what you needed to do relative to the industry, the company. Now you need to know which executive is the right executive to target. Because there are a lot of executives, especially now, a lot more than before. The usual used to be about the org chart, about 6 people reported to the CEO directly. We're talking about billion plus companies, by the way. Today, the average is about 8, which means they're new players and there are more people who are involved in the decision making. So if you're able to target the people that are most important in the decision of your proposal, that says a lot. You've really done 50% of the work when you have the right person versus the person who's less interested. This is your average org chart, of a public company, shareholders, board of directors, CEO. The top executive will vary based on the industry. So if you have a pharma industry, you're going to have a head of research and development. If you have an industrial company, you're definitely going to have a head of manufacturing or a COO, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the executives that would be in any company. And then you need to be comfortable and aware of what their key responsibilities are, because they all have a common goal, but they all have specific goals also. And the closer you align your solution to their interests and their goals, the more probable you'll be able to access them. And the more probable they'll be interested in speaking with you or meeting with you. I would say 90% of the access relates to the wrong executive or to the wrong subject. I repeat that one because it's really important. Either the wrong person or the wrong content subject. And most of them just are not even looked at. It goes directly in delete by executive assistant or my swiping right or left. So if you know the content and you know the executive and you identify these are the 2 things, you've tenfolded your chance of getting in, starting with that. So you have more executives. I won't go through all these, but you have more and more executives.
Hey, Jacques, quick question on that previous slide there. With so many executives, you've mentioned more and more and more, and with the creation of these new C-level roles, how do we know who's the key executive to target, and why is it so important to align and customize our solutions to those CXOs?
Okay, because in general, like I mentioned, 90% of these access are irrelevant. I'm going to assume up front that it's another irrelevant access request that's coming my way. And I'm going to ask the first question, is this relevant to the company? And if the answer is no, then it's the delete. And the next question will be, is this relevant to me in my function? And if the answer is no, usually it's still going to be a delete because I don't have the time to kind of do the goals of other executives. Unfortunately, that's reality. And the third question I'll have is, do I have to get involved? Which means, can somebody in my team take care of it? Why are they writing to the VP of finance or the director of customer service or? So if I am not the relevant person, then I'm going to say I should not be involved. So that's going to be my screening method first. So most of them are going to be screened out. And then if it relates to me and my function and my role and my being involved directly, then I'll look what it is. And do I want to really get involved? And what's your message and why? So it's a little bit of a screening process from the executive mindset to say, if it's not mapped to me and relevant to me directly, most likely I'm not going to waste my time.
And we have a question in the chat, Jacques, and you might want to tackle it now, but I know it's a subject that will come up shortly. The question is, how empowered are the executive assistants supporting these execs?
They're extremely empowered, extremely empowered. So especially at the top level, the executive assistant is really the person that manages your time, who comes in and who doesn't. So they're the ones who think of them are deleting everything coming in that's not relevant, and also allowing everything to come in that they consider relevant. Our executive assistants know our priorities. They know what's important to us. They're the closest thing to a trusted advisor to us. When I was at Schwab, big financial services company, Chuck Schwab, the founder, chairman, CEO, etc., he had his executive assistant for 15 years, Helen. And one day, there is a press release, and it says, Helen has been promoted to Executive Vice President Administration, Chief of Staff. And she had lots of functions reporting to her. She knew the business. She basically knew what everything was going through Chuck. So don't underestimate the executive assistant, and don't think of that person, him or her, as a blocker. Think of him or her as somebody you need to convince, you need to explain to what you need to do, and you need to really trust. I know a lot of people think about the worst thing you could do is try to ignore that person, or not give that person respect, or not realize the importance of that person. They are our trusted advisor. And I'll come back to a question that I think I didn't answer, Catherine, and that is who to go to with so many executives. You're right, there are a lot of executives that get involved. Think of the new executives that popped up in the last 5 years. Chief Digital Officer, Chief Innovation Officer, Chief People Officer, I can go on and on. And you may ask yourself, what's the difference between the Chief Revenue Officer, the Chief Sales Officer, the Chief Marketing Officer, the Chief Customer Officer? A lot of them have common goals, but a lot of them have specifics again. So one way you can test who is the most important executive is by asking yourself, the solution that you provide, the service that you propose, which executive has the most to gain or the most to lose from the impact of that solution? And that will give you a good idea who is the right executive. And having said that, it doesn't mean it's only one, but most of the time there's one key person. And that person, you do not want to miss that person, because you could be spending a lot of time with other executives that have senior roles and titles, but they're not the key relevant executives. I know of several cases where some really good salespeople, they spent a lot of time trying to get through certain executives, only to realize later on they're not really the relevant executives. And that's a waste of the salespeople time. The executives, if they're not the relevant ones, will never tell you that they're irrelevant. We have egos, we have power. Yeah, talk to me, waste your time. I want to know more about what's going on in the company. But guess what? I'm not going to tell you that I'm not involved in that decision as much as others. It's not what I do to people that I don't report to. Okay, but good, very good question. So you need to map whatever my priority is, my being the CXO priority, and my goals and how I'm going to achieve it, to whatever you're proposing that will help me do that. This is just a very sample example. If you're targeting, for example, the chief marketing officer, then it's all about the customers, and it's all about increasing revenue and increasing accounts and increasing sales. Same thing with the chief sales officer, chief revenue officer, etc. If you're targeting the CFO, these can be part of it, but also if it relates anything to expense management, margin, profitability, that CFO is always going to be involved. The COO, it's about a lot of stuff relating to, if it's industrial asset utilization, time to market, better collaboration, etc. So make sure that whatever you're proposing is tying to my goals. And then what's the impact on the P&L or the income statement? And what's the impact on the balance sheet or my assets and my liabilities? Because we're judged by these two financial statements. The more you're familiar with these statements and the impact of your proposal on these statements, the more credible, the more convincing you are, and the better chance you are to get through those. And you can go on to the chief digital officer and chief information officer and chief technology officer, etc., etc. Know what their KPIs are, know what their business challenges are, know how your solution or proposal maps to these, and how. How in terms of operationally. By operational, I mean what does it does to the business, the before and after. What does it do to my own people? What does it do to my customers? What does it do to my financials, meaning balance sheet, income statement? And guess what? What does it do to me personally, me? You know, ask yourself the before and after of all these. And if you can't simply explain it in layman's term, then probably you're not ready. I would not try to access any CXO before you can actually explain it in very simple terms, what you're proposing. Because guess what? We don't really understand all your technology solutions, all your engineering solutions, all your, whether it is IoT or AR or any of the terminology or any of the technical stuff that you have. We understand our business. So it has to be translated into our language and our business, not yours, for us to be able to communicate it higher up or across the organization. The repeatability factor is really important when you propose anything. And we look at how, I remember when I took a flight from San Francisco when I was at Schwab to Sydney, Australia. The very first 747-400 flight, great flight, 15 and a half hours, by the way. I landed there and I pulled out my US Bank of America debit card. I put it in the first cash machine, which was the cash machine of the biggest bank in Australia. And it asked me a lot of questions for security. You know, what would you like to do? Get cash. How much? No. How much? I have to choose my amount. Do you want a receipt? No. Do you want another transaction? No. It took a minute and a half to do that transaction. I got my cash out. I walked about 12 steps to the number 3 company, another ATM. I put in my card, same card, automatically recognized me, and it said, Mr. Shamus, would you like the equivalent of another $200 US without receipt, yes or no? Yes. 20-second transaction. 20-second. Of course, security is really important in that, but that goes without saying. That's key. But everything being equal, the customer experience is a lot more pleasurable with the second situation and the first situation. So customer retention, customer acquisition, customer satisfaction, all these contribute to that net promoter score relating to the customer that you just saw, for example. When you go to talk to the head of marketing or the CEO, even the president of the company in bank number 1, you'll tell them not what's the technology behind, whether it's the CRM or whatever they have in the back that makes it work and think that way, but basically explain to them what's the experience from the customer standpoint. That's what they want to feel. No, because they remember that. And we remember that. Moving on. Let's go to a little bit more. Now that you've done all your research, you're ready, and you know which executive. Now it's a matter of what do you write? What channel? How long? What do you ask for? Well, let's start by looking at studies that were made in terms of what's the best method to access. In all these cases, assuming you're prepared, by the way. So the first one by far, is if you get a recommendation from our own company, from somebody credible, the more senior, the better, that will give you the best odds. That's not a surprise. But if you can't get that, if you have a referral from somebody outside my company, also credible, all that stuff, that's the next best. After that, it drops down quickly to emails, phone calls, cold calls, etc. Let me show you the actual stats. Can people see these actual stats? If you look at recommendation from someone in your company, always they ask CXOs, would you take a call? Would you take a meeting? That was their answer. 16% always, 68% usually. So about 84% of the time they would meet with you or talk to you. That's huge, of course, if you get a reference. Then if you get a reference from outside the company, it's almost half the time. So if you go after that, you look how far it goes down. Dips very quickly. 4% cold calls, 0% for always. But look at this last column, contact at an offsite event. I usually will take a call 44% of the time based on 1,000 CXOs who responded. 44%, that's huge. Very few people use that. Very few people make a reference to an offsite event when they try to reach a CXO. So that is one thing in terms of the stats and the probabilities to improve your odds. If you can't get a referral, go to an offsite event. You can't get an offsite event, go to a CFO or a CEO quotation, or back to what I was saying most people do, the quarterly analyst call. Because again, you differentiate yourself immediately when you do that.
Jacques, a couple of questions, if you don't mind. One is in the chat, the statistics you just showed us on the previous slide. Where would we be able to find them? Where did those come from?
Those came from a study that basically was done to 1,000 CEOs, CFOs, and COOs of a billion plus companies. And this was N, which means CEO, and N-1 who responded to them. So those are really their responses on would they answer or not answer that particular request.
On this slide here, what are the traits that you look for to screen a caller who reached out to you, in a cold call? You think about our story we started off with. What would the traits be that you look for?
I look at, are they telling me something that I don't know? Do they know something that most people don't know about my company and about me? That's the first thing, because that really eliminates 90% of the calls and messages. And if you have that, back to the research and preparation, if you have that, my ear is a lot more open. Okay, and then I go to the list that I mentioned. Does it relate to my company, me, somebody in my area, etc.?
Got it. Thank you.
And again, if you can't get a referral, get something that most people don't do. Refer to that. Some of the best practices of an email, because everybody wants to know, what do I write in an email? Okay, already we talked about number one. We said it has to be relevant and relevant to me and relevant to my function. You got to keep it short and to the point. So anything longer than a couple of paragraphs probably will be not read. And if you have a referral, include it in the subject line, because a lot of stuff gets screened from the subject line. If I don't know the person writing, it will go to the subject line. If that's not relevant, I won't even go after that. And most people will ask for a lot of time. Like, can we have an hour, 1 hour meeting, 45-minute meeting? My suggestion, ask for a 15 or 20-minute meeting. No more, because we can find that time. And basically, if you're requesting that amount of time, means you're ready and you know what you want to say in a succinct manner. The other thing is more on form. When you have something ready, make yourself the CXO. If you read it as if you have that role and that responsibility, does it basically interest for you to meet the person? And why not? And read it on a smartphone and on a desktop. Print it and read it again, because you don't know how the executive will look at it. And last but not least, the follow-up. Most people give up after 2 or 3 tries. And most of the time, it takes about 5 or 6 tries to get through. Catherine's example, look how many tries, 20 tries to get through to whatever's needed, different channels. So you have to follow up till closing, till there's somebody who says to you no. Professionally, which means don't call every day or don't write every day, but once a week, a professional, and keep it professional.
So that's a good question and a good point there, Jacques. Often we're taught that it's 8+ touches, as you've mentioned, to get through. How far apart should those touches be, whether it's email, calls, or LinkedIn messages, snail mail, to not frustrate the executive?
Once a week. And if you get an executive assistant, by chance intercepting versus voicemail, do ask the executive assistant for his or her advice. When should I call again? If they say call in a couple of weeks, wait a couple of weeks and then call.
Okay.
And then basically that person is your guide. So you call again in a couple of weeks, and let's say she says, he's on a plane in Frankfurt. He's not going to be back for another week. That's fine. When should I call again? When should I follow up again? Be patient, be respectful, and follow that advice from the executive assistant. I go back to that. Till closing, once a week max again. Unless he or she says to you, call in 2 days, of course.
Okay.
Okay. This was an example of most emails coming up. My name is so-and-so. I'm from this company. We're big. We have so much revenue, so much clients. Can we take an hour slot to discuss? Delete, delete, delete. This is a little bit more relevant. You have a referral. You're talking about us. You're giving us some specifics of what you may want to talk about. Don't get into the deep detail of what you're going to talk to us about, but give us an indication of the potential value of meeting with you, because that gives us enough interest to want more. It's a little bit like Kathleen almost did intentionally. I'm not sure intentionally or not in the beginning. She told us a story and she got us interested. And I really want to meet with her, listen to her. What does she have to say next? And that's what email is intended to do. The purpose of the email is just to get the meeting, not to get into the meeting. So this we said again, treat the secretary as the executive. Follow up till closure. Half the people give up after one follow-up. Those are statistics from a lot of studies from salespeople.
And by closure, you mean successful access?
Successful access or not. If the executive basically said, no, we're not interested, or if the executive said, I spoke with him or her, and they really can't meet with you or don't want to meet with you, that's closing.
Thank you for clarifying.
It's not closing like signing the deal. You have closure, conclusion. So this is a one-page summary of how to make this much harder than ever before a little easier with this three-step process: the research preparation, knowing the right executive, and all relevant to that executive with the substance and the form. And that's about it.
Mine's not really a question. It's rather a comment, just to say thank you, Jacques, for your generosity of spirit and sharing so much. And taking a step towards vulnerability. I think an area where we perhaps have not been as strong as we need to is really investigating how the executives are being remunerated. There are many other aspects. We've looked at business objectives, we've researched the account, we understand, we strive to understand the legislation, the commercial factors, the competitor environment, and all of those things, but haven't really invested enough time, I think, in understanding, what's the skin in the game for the executives. So thank you very much for that. And it was very, very practical.
It is practical and it's public information. I go back to that. And if by chance you have a company that is private, which means not listed anywhere, and they don't have to disclose that stuff, just look at a competing company as close to it as possible. And you look at their KPIs, and most likely they'll be similar to my KPIs.
One just follow-up question on that, and perhaps there are, I don't know if there would be cultural differences. When you're in a meeting with a C-suite exec, how frank or candid can you be in your questioning? Because I'll tell you why. Sometimes in that environment, one is tempted to really sugarcoat things or to be very subtle and really not wanting to be direct or to come across as being offensive. Is it perhaps best to be direct, like Catherine expressed in that story? What's your take on that?
My take is you can be as direct as you want, but I'm always going to think about your next question. Is it bringing me any insight, or am I learning anything from your question? So if your question gives me information that is useful to me and my business and my job, you can be as direct as you want. Of course, you'll know the cultural differences. You're going to be a little less. You're going to be a little less direct in a place like Japan than you would be in a place like the Netherlands, for example. You have to manage it accordingly. But everything you say, I'm going to think, what's in it for me? And am I getting value from continuing to meet with you?
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines of which it's tricky to do this well and add value to the client. It's not impossible, but I'm thinking along the lines of deal qualification. If I think about reps who think they're at a much further down the sales process than they actually are because they didn't ask the important qualification questions up front. So that's what I was thinking. So I suppose it's a bit of an art to do that in a way that also adds value to the client. Thank you very much for your response, Jacques.
Not at all. And one last comment on that. If you have 3 questions and one of them is really important to you, but even better if it's important to me, start with that question first, because we may never get to these other 2 questions. You should always go with what's the most important to me as the executive, even though you may have a question that's more important to you as a salesperson. Start with what's important to me. Always remember, the intent of the first meeting isn't to get all the answers. It's to really continue the dialogue and advance the deal. Just apply. Always, the last piece of advice I give you is always put yourself in the shoes of the person you're writing to.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining. We hope it was insightful, and that you're going to be feel a bit more empowered and maybe even encouraged by what you've seen and heard today. And Jacques, thank you so very much for making this webinar possible. Really powerful session. And if you have any further questions, Jacques' contact details, you can reach out to Jacques. By all means, you can reach out to our team as well if there's anything we can help you with. And once again, really appreciate your active participation and engagement throughout. Your presence is always what makes the difference. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.